Hello, it's 5 o'clock. Welcome to another reading from the Falconer's Quarry. I'm just slightly flapping around the computer. It's Thursday, isn't it? And actually, it's a long weekend now for the rest of for tomorrow and then into the weekend. I was suddenly realising I hadn't decided yet whether I would carry on reading tomorrow because I just haven't really thought about it. On the one hand, there's kind of almost no reason not to, but on the other hand, actually there is every possibility that with the kids not doing school and my other half at home that I might actually forget. So I think probably I'm going to say no, I'll come back on Monday to do chapter 5. We're only just getting into this book anyway. So yeah, it's Thursday. We haven't had a massively productive day. We did some work this morning and then it was so beautiful we decided to go for a walk up on the hillside opposite where I live and take a snack to eat with us, and it was so lovely. It was so sunny. We didn't come back down until it was too late really to do anything useful. So yeah, we haven't done as much, so that means it's a 3.5 day week. Not massively productive, but there we are. That's just how it is sometimes. I think I said that before. Maybe that's my motto in life. That's just how it is. So excuse my white legs. It's been warm enough. I've actually been wearing shorts because it's been lovely and warm. Right, so chapter 4. Yes, chapter 4. Okay, so Lucy. Oh, sorry, I've got a hair in my mouth. One of mine, I think. Lucy has been. They were up in Lucy's mother's room. And she has just spotted Tobias out of the window. And so she's decided they'll come back and visit her. Oh, that's what, right. They were on their way to her mother's room. They'd actually got as far as Lucy's own room. And they've decided to come back. She's going to come back and see her mother later. Says, let's go and catch Tobias now while we can. And Joe is really apprehensive about this because he knows who this person is and what he's like. Okay, chapter 4. Lucy hurried out of the room and down the stairs to the courtyard. Joe followed more slowly. There was no handrail, and he didn't want to trip down the stone spiral and hurt himself. She was across the courtyard and... Sorry, can you hear that? We have some field behind our house, and it's got some lambs in at the moment, and there's a very small black lamb. Just the one black lamb, who is extremely vocal, and he's rushing up and down at this end of the field, bleating very, very loudly. He's quite a long way from where I'm sitting, but it's so loud that I feel like you might well hear him. Anyway, sorry, I don't think he's listening to the story properly. Lucy was across the courtyard and most of the way back along the passageway to the entrance by the time he caught her up. Outside, she slowed a little, and they made their way together around the walls of the castle and across the compound. Behind the castle was a formal garden. It was quite large and laid out in a hexagonal pattern with paths edged by knee-high hedges, so that the sections of earth in between looked as though they'd been drawn around with a huge green pen. Around the outer edge, the path had been made into a sort of tunnel by a vine or creeper of some kind overgrowing a series of wooden arches. 2 men were weeding the garden, but Tobias was nowhere to be seen. "Where's he gone?" Joe asked. "He'll be in the mews. He was fetching water from the lake for the birds." Joe wondered what birds she meant, but decided to wait and see. They were walking towards a low wooden shed tucked in beside the wall that enclosed the compound. This couldn't be the mews, Joe thought. He distinctly remembered visiting friends in London who'd lived in a mews, and it had been a courtyard of old stone buildings. But it did seem to be, because as he and Lucy reached it, a door at one end opened, and Tobias emerged. "Hello, Mistress Lucy," he said with a smile. "Did you enjoy the rest of your ride?" "Not exactly." She tried to look cross. It wasn't very convincing. "I got set upon by some peasant boys," she told Tobias. "Did you really?" The older boy was concerned. "Or are you just teasing, punishing me for not coming back for you?" "Yes, really. If it hadn't been for Joe, I don't know what would have happened." Tobias looked at Joe and raised his eyebrows. "The hero of the hour." He bowed. "I'm grateful to you, whoever you are." Joe nodded brusquely. The older boy was more courteous than he'd expected, but anyone could be polite if they put their mind to it. He wasn't going to be taken in. Tobias turned back to Lucy. "I'm sorry. Sorry, wrong voice. I'm sorry, really I am. I'd got right out to the edge of the woods before I realised you weren't with me. And there was the cadge boy waiting. He said the Falconer wanted me back here straight away. You know I wouldn't have left you otherwise." "You shouldn't have left me," Lucy said, sticking her nose in the air. "You could get into a lot of trouble for that." "Come now," Tobias coaxed. "You wouldn't want that, would you? All's well that ends well. I promise it won't happen again." Lucy looked at him with mock severity. "Go on," cajoled Tobias. "Forgive me." He nudged her with his elbow, the way an older brother might. Lucy's face broke into a smile. "All right then, promise." Tobias put his hand on his chest and lowered his head. "I swear it," he said solemnly. "Now I shall be getting on, or Master Talbot will start feeding bits of me to the birds." He set off towards the door in the compound wall with the pail. As Joe walked with Lucy back across the grass to the castle, he tried to make sense of the encounter. There was no doubt that Tobias had seemed much kinder and friendlier than Tiberius or Thorbiorn had ever been.
Mummy,
What is it? My small son has found a very small feather. Go on. Go on, Benji. As Joe walked with Lucy back across the grass to the castle, he tried to make sense of the encounter. There was no doubt that Tobias seemed much kinder and friendlier than Tiberius or Thorbiorn had ever been. Yet he was also unquestionably the same boy, and that boy had been cruel and dangerous. "What exactly does Tobias do?" he asked Lucy. "Isn't it obvious?" she said. "He's the apprentice falconer." "So the mews are where the falcons are kept?" "Of course." "And what does the cadge boy do?" "He carries the cadge, you idiot." "What's that?" "It's the frame that the falcons perch on when they're taken out to hunt." She stopped walking and turned to face him. Joe winced. He could see that he'd asked one question too many. "I've had enough of this," she said. She crossed her arms and looked him in the eye. "You've been lying to me, haven't you? Admit it. You're an imposter." Joe gulped. Before he could answer, she went on, "I don't know how you got hold of the Lord St. John's livery, but you're not a page in his household, are you? You know nothing about anything." Joe's lips were dry. He ran his tongue over them. "I'm not exactly who you thought I was," he said. "Right, so you are an imposter. Is any part of what you told me true?" He swallowed. This wasn't going to be easy. And yet he didn't know why he felt quite so anxious. She'd accepted him readily enough in the last two worlds. Why should it be any different this time? "I am Joseph Hopkins," he said, "and everyone does call me Joe. And I'm not an imposter, not deliberately anyway." He took a deep breath and then spoke quickly, not wanting her to interrupt now that he'd started. "I come from the future, you see, centuries away from now. It's something to do with my St. Christopher. I don't know exactly what. Sometimes I just find myself in another time, and then I'm wearing the right clothes for the world I've turned up in." "So you woke up here this morning?" Lucy looked sceptical. "No, I was out riding back in my own world, and the horse threw me off." When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground in the woods where you found me. So why are you dressed in the Lord St. John's livery? Why not something else? Sorry, there's consternation in the field. I remember now why I've been doing this in the upstairs room. We've had all 3 of my children go through the room. I don't know whether you noticed. Other than the first one. The second... And actually one didn't. No, one managed to go around the outside. But he was just through the double doors and the sheep are bleating their little socks off. Okay, where had I got to? Oh yes, she says, you woke up here this morning. No, I was out riding, back in my own world, and the horse threw me off. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground in the woods where you found me. So why are you dressed in the Lord St. John's livery? Why not something else? He spread out his hands helplessly. I really have no idea. And the horse I was riding, that was the one I was riding back at home. I don't know how, but it came with me. She stared. So you hadn't come from Sir William Paulet at all? No. Joe felt as though he should apologise. I'd never even heard of him until you mentioned his name. And will he know who you are? Joe scuffed the ground with his toe. I doubt it, he said quietly. That'll be interesting. When you deliver the reply from my father? Lucy seemed to be enjoying his predicament. Joe kept his eyes fixed on the ground. He hadn't dared think about that yet. Lucy began to walk on again. But of course, you really were carrying a message from the Lord St. John, she said, almost to herself, and then, are you absolutely sure that you're from the future? Well, I know that Catherine Parr will outlive Henry and Edward will become king. Of course he will, she said dismissively. He's the heir to the throne. You don't need special powers to know that. All right then. Joe felt provoked. Edward will die when he's only 15. Then Mary will be queen for a bit, and then Henry's other daughter Elizabeth will be queen for years and years. He looked squarely at Lucy, daring her to contradict him. But she had turned pale and was glancing all around again. What is it this time? He asked, exasperated. Keep your voice down, she hissed, nodding towards men tending the gardens. Why? Because it definitely is treason to talk about the death of the king or the queen or the king's heir. But that's ridiculous, Joe whispered. Anyway, you wanted me to prove I'm from the future. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. Well, if you're right, Lucy murmured, and you're still here when Edward, she broke off. Dies? Supplied Joe helpfully. Lucy flinched and pressed her finger hard against her lips. If people hear you saying that, then when it does happen, if it does, you could be denounced as a witch. A witch? Yes. She looked around again. If you've predicted it, and then it happens, people might think you cast a spell. But nobody would believe that. Lucy shrugged. Why not? I'd tell them it wasn't true, Joe said indignantly. She snorted. Much good may it do you. People always cry that they're innocent when the noose goes round their necks. Joe gaped. You mean I could be hanged for saying something like that? I don't know. Maybe. She hurried on, not looking at him. But you'd stand up for me, wouldn't you? She didn't answer. Lucy? Still she kept her gaze averted. Joe bit his lip. Of course, as far as she was concerned, she'd only just met him. Why should she take any kind of risk for him? They skirted the outside of the castle in silence, then went back through the entrance. Joe felt as though his brain was grappling with an idea that was too big for it. Might a person really be hanged just for talking about the death of the king or his heir? It seemed unbelievable. But he remembered that at school they'd learned about people having their hands cut off for stealing bread, or being burned at the stake as heretics just for wanting to read the Bible in English. And of course Henry VIII had had 2 of his own wives beheaded. What chance was there for an ordinary person accused of doing something wrong? Joe could see that even though he didn't belong in this world, he would have to be much more careful. Lucy wouldn't denounce him as a witch, he was sure of that. But if they were overheard, someone else might. He followed her along the passage to the courtyard again. The man with the horse and cart had gone, and the children polishing the plates had been sent off to do something else. But the boy beating the rug was busy with another one, and 2 youths were rolling barrels across the cobbles to a doorway on the other side. "Let's go and see my mother," Lucy said. "I want to tell her that you rescued me." She was speaking normally again, and it was clear that their previous conversation was finished. Joe sighed. It was probably for the best, but he felt that they'd got sidetracked. He'd wanted to tell her that he'd met her before. Sooner or later she would have to know that, if he was going to persuade her that Tobias was not as nice as he seemed. Lucy led the way back up the staircase to the room they'd been in earlier, and through a door at the other end. The second room was easily twice the size of the first, but there was scarcely any more furniture in here. Beside the inner window, a wicker cage hung from the ceiling. Inside, a bird hopped to and fro, fluttering its wings against the bars. Nearby, a small mirror had been fixed to the wall, and a tapestry hung above the fireplace where a fire was roaring. One of the larger windows was wide open, which struck Joe as strange. If you wanted the room warm, why let all the heat escape like that? On every ledge and surface were vases of primroses and other spring flowers. Lucy's sister lay on a low bed in the corner. Her mother sat sewing in a chair nearby. "Madam?" Lucy approached softly. "How is my sister?" Her mother looked up. Her face was grey, and her eyes puffy with tiredness or crying. But Joe still recognised the woman he'd met before. "She's no better," Lucy's mother said in a dull voice. "Her throat and tongue are so swollen, she's barely eaten any of the fish they sent up, and there's no cucumber or lettuce to be had at this time of year to cool her fever. Here, take the pomander." She held out an orange studded with cloves and other spices or herbs that Joe couldn't make out. Lucy took it and held it under her nose as she crept towards the bed where Anne lay, listless, with the bed covers pushed back. Anne's face blazed scarlet, and Joe could see the same burning colour through the loose neck of her shift. Lucy knelt down. "How are you?" she whispered over the pomander. Anne gave a feeble shake of her head. "You'll get better," Lucy murmured, squeezing her hand. A tear trickled down Anne's cheek. Lucy brushed it away. "God is testing you, but he's not going to take you away from us just yet." A tear ran down Anne's other cheek. "I've sent a message to your father," Lucy's mother said. "He will bring the physician from Salisbury with him this evening." She jabbed her needle into the material in her lap and picked up a posy of primroses which she put to her nose. "I'd rather not have done it, but we've tried everything in the still room, and the cures we've had from the woman in the village haven't worked either." She looked into the fire. "I don't know. The peony seed powder didn't seem to do anything at all, and I don't think the wormwood and the house leek plaster helped either. We need something more powerful. The physician will be able to calculate the stars for us. Maybe that will work." Lucy stood up and moved away from her sister's bed. She put the pomander back on the arm of her mother's chair. "I've brought someone to meet you, Mother," she said, and nodded to Joe. "This is Master Joseph Hopkins, Sir William Paulet's page. Joe, this is my mother, Lady Ellen Lucas." Joe took off his cap, bowed, and then put the cap back on. Not Helen or Eileen, he thought. So much for his guesses. Lucy's mother inclined her head. Joe came to my rescue this morning, Lucy said. I was ambushed by some boys in the woods. You were riding alone? Lucy's mother asked sharply. No, Lucy said quickly. Master Tobias, the Falconer's apprentice, was with me, but he was a little ahead. We were racing, you see. In any case, Joe scared the boys away, didn't you, Joe? She smiled encouragingly at him. Joe gave another little bow. I was bringing a letter for your husband, he said to Lucy's mother. It was good fortune that I arrived at the right moment. He suppressed a smile. He could hear himself talking as though he was in a costume drama on the television, but it felt right, and Ellen Lucas gave no sign that she thought he was speaking oddly. That was lucky indeed, she said, without great interest. And now? The steward told me I must wait for Sir William's return so that I can take the reply back to my master. Very good. She looked up at Lucy again. Please could you find Mary and ask her to bring up some dried fruit for Anne and some of the ripest cheese they have in the kitchens. If we can't cool her fever, we can at least try to dry out the moisture that's flooded her body. I'll do anything to avoid the bloodletting. She grimaced. Lucy nodded, curtsied, and gestured to Joe for them to leave. Back in the stairwell, her face crumpled. Don't worry, Lucy. Joe reached out and patted her shoulder awkwardly as she stood on the step below him. It'll be all right. Anne will get better. Lucy screwed her eyes shut and stood very still. After a moment, however, she seemed to have gathered herself together. I don't think so, she said. My mother wouldn't be sending for the physician unless it was really serious. On a day like Easter Eve, they can charge what they like, because they know you're desperate. She wouldn't do it if she didn't think Anne might die. Joe blinked. What was wrong with Anne that was so serious that it might kill her? She had a rash, that was obvious, and a temperature. But everything Lucy and her mother had said about the illness had sounded like nonsense, about the balance of her humours and the stars, or about eating cucumber to cool her fever, and her body being flooded and needing dried fruit and cheese. And what was the business with all the flowers and the pomander? Lucy had been happy to touch Anne, but she'd kept the orange right under her nose the whole time, as though that would do anything. Worst of all, it sounded like they were going to let the doctor start draining Anne's blood if she didn't get better. I'm sure the physician will be able to do something, he said, trying to keep his doubt out of his voice. Lucy looked down at her feet. Maybe, she said, without conviction. Slowly she started down the stairs. Then she stopped and turned back to Joe. You know what? She said. There is one thing we could do. There we are. The end of chapter 4. Lucy has had an idea. We do also now know who Tobias is. We had this before. I think I said at the end of yesterday's video, do we know who he is? Do we know? Have I said yet? Had I put that in the second chapter? We know now he is the apprentice to the Falconer, rather than anybody else. So he's not actually related to Lucy, and he does seem quite different this time. So is he different, maybe? Is Joe wrong to be wary? Or is Lucy mistaken? But if Lucy's mistaken, why is he so nice? So there we are. I will be back on Monday. So next week we will have chapters 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. And then we'll finish another week or so, week and a bit after that. Because I think this is 17 chapters, I can't remember. Anyway, it's lovely to see some of you here. And I hope you'll be back for the next chapter. See you soon.